Let's turn to Austin Williams, Senior Lecturer at Kingston University and increasingly a regular contributor here, for which thank you, Austin. What did you make of today? What did you see as an academic that perhaps either underscored or challenged some of your preconceptions?
Well, I mean, Freedom Day was a month ago, wasn't it? This was meant to be Terminus Day, so this is the complete end of all restrictions, and that certainly wasn't the case. And some of your testimonials, it's really interesting that you're reading out people saying that they weren't wearing a mask as some kind of brave statement of liberty.
How would previous generations feel about that? I mean,
tell me about it. I mean, the thing is, I came down on the train today, mainline train, which allowed people not to wear masks, but even so, I would say maybe 30% were.
How did they express that? Austin, was it on the tannoy, there were signs?
We had an email after booking tickets. So obviously arriving in London, suddenly we're on the tube and we're all fully gagged up again. But coming down, it was very interesting. There was a couple of elderly people. I class myself as slightly younger than that, but some elderly people who, let's imagine that they may be vulnerable or they may be nervous. That's fair enough. A lot of young people, as you say, like students, millennials, were masked up and masked from the train walking through continually. There's a very strange thing going on here.
To what do you attribute that?
Well, I think it's partly this idea that, when we first started this idea that the vaccine was the solution to all our problems, it was vaccinate everybody over 50 because that's where the problems lay. Then suddenly it's come down 40, 30, and now we're down to 20, 18. And of course, the 18 to 30-year-olds aren't buying it because they were told that they weren't actually going to be facing a risk. So they've got this really interesting tension between people who don't think they have a problem being now told that if you don't get a vaccine, then you're going to be punished with a vaccine passport and nightclubs will be barred to you and all the rest.
And the nightclubs were full last night, weren't they?
I know, yeah. Well, I mean, I only got that vicarious pleasure of that. But the joy of that must be fantastic going out in a nightclub. And I was actually reminded of, and I don't say this lightly, but David Cameron, when he did that kind of big society idea back in 2010, that idea that, there was a broken society, we have to fix it. And the way to do that was artifice was part of the problem when Cameron did it. But the idea that you would bring people together, that it would be part of that kind of voluntarism, and you would have parties, a big lunch. And that, for me, there's something in that. Do you know what I mean? Where you think that actually that today would have much more meaning if you actually said the government is going to get behind people, coming together, forming street parties, showing solidarity, and really kind of being friendly.
Austin, I've lost count of the number of debates I've moderated on telly, talking about voter apathy, disengagement, and here we have a situation where people are required to pass the world around them and arrive at a conclusion that will have real-world consequences, not serious ones, but actually for a lot of people, we live in fairly unheroic times by many measures compared historically. And actually deciding to go out today, for some people, into a shop, maskless, not really knowing what kind of reaction they'd get, maybe more than a raised eyebrow, perhaps a raised voice, maybe even worse. And that was a big heroic step for some people that took it.
Absolutely. No, I don't downplay that in the slightest. I think there are people who've been living alone, there's old people, I know lots of young people who actually are living on their own in flats.
8 million people live alone in Britain.
Yes, with no gardens, they're living in small apartments in London because that's all they can afford. And many of those people, it's a little bit like, it's an effort of will to get out of bed in the morning for some of those people, and it becomes a very internalized world. Breaking from that is going to take some doing. And I don't like the phrase well-being, but I do think that there is something about what has been created in the last 18 months which has really fractured people's belief and confidence in themselves to act upon the world. And that's really what we'd really have to try to engender. How that happens is kind of a big philosophical as well as a political question.
Well, here's one way it can happen. The government definitively says it's over. We think now the risk is negligible. We want to return to some sense of normality because we appreciate that face masks, though some people derive comfort from them, in and of themselves hinder clear communication, especially if you're hard of hearing, deaf, trying to lip read, or a child learning and developing speech skills. Ergo, they're bad. We want rid of them. How many of those people today, and we don't know what percentage of people have stuck with masks, but we presume it's a majority. How many of those people, when that happens, will say, okay, it's off for good?
True, but I sort of think what you saw this morning with Boris Johnson and his U-turn, his 2-hour U-turn, for me, I saw it in a different light. The fact that he's been double jabbed, he's had COVID, he's got immunity coming out of his backside. I mean, the point is that of all the people in the world who probably didn't have to self-isolate, it was him. So he basically makes this stupid statement saying, I'm now on a pilot program. It's going to become nonsense. But the fact is, what he should have said was, I've been double jabbed, I've got immunity, therefore I'm not self-isolating. And I would recommend all of you people out there who've got the vaccine, have a bit of bravado and have a bit of self-confidence to go out there and be actors on the world. So by backtracking, the cowardice within government, that all it takes is a couple of tweets to kind of demonstrate the irresponsibility of the Prime Minister, let's not forget, and back in his box he goes. And that can't really help people's confidence on the ground. That can only undermine people's ability to take control of their own lives.
I wonder how many people will decide, and we're talking about personal responsibility here, how many people will decide, even when the government says, that's it, no need, and the big corporate entities, the London Underground, the train companies, some of those supermarkets are still advising that you wear a mask. When they say, actually, you don't need to, will there be an irreducible hardcore who, for whatever reason, and perhaps you'll explore some of them, just feel now quite happy wearing a mask?
Well, I'm not sure people feel happy about it. As a matter of fact, I think people are fed up with the whole thing, to be honest with you. Even some of the...
But there are lots of habits which aren't good for you, which we get used to. They become habitual, don't they?
No, that's very true. But, even some of the independent SAGE advisors consistently say that they don't like masks and they want to get rid of them.
The non-communist ones.
Well, I mean, their political persuasion is one thing. It's more what they recommend and everybody else do is part of the problem. But even they're saying, it's not yet time. Do you know what I mean? We have to now wait another month, another 6 months, whatever it might be. So the problem with that is that is a kind of, I was going to say philosophical position, that's probably too grand a phrase. But for the last, 5, 10, 15 years, the idea of the precautionary principle of risk aversion, where, don't do something, I mean, the sustainability mantra is do not do things today in case it's harmful to future generations. That's the be-all and end-all of environmentalism. And if that is your mantra, if that is your basic orthodoxy, then you aren't going to do anything, are you? Because obviously you can tell whether it's harmful. Part of the problem is that actually people who are anti-vax are also saying the same thing. Right? They are also saying, how do you know that taking the vaccine will not cause problems further down the line? So everybody from both sides of the argument are playing kind of, the opposite side of the coin, are saying very much the same thing. Precaution is the watchword. And that is, completely harmful to, being a player in the world, because you're always constantly saying, what I do may impact, not now, maybe later, sometime in the future, in a detrimental manner. And that's risk aversion writ large. And that's fundamental to every government mandate you can probably point your finger to.
Your academic background is looking at the way people are going to live in the future in cities, built environments, how we all rub along or don't in that situation. What kind of conclusions are you coming to about the effect of COVID? Is that too big a question?
Well, I mean,
we've only got 10 minutes.
I think, we've only got 5 seconds. I think time will tell. I mean, I think that humans are very resilient as a species, and therefore we will kind of fight back. I mean, partly, the part of the problem is that we have upper echelons, and like you're saying, industries, commerce, businesses are all governed by risk aversion, partly because they're afraid of insurance liability, partly because they're afraid of being, not being seen.
Austin, was that lovely moment, it lasted about 36 hours, when the companies didn't quite know what to do.
Yeah.
And they waited for other people to jump before they jumped. And Sainsbury's sort of said, oh, no, maybe we've got mask free. And then somebody else, Tesco, said, no, we won't. And then Sainsbury's sort of rode back.
No, but
on we go.
That's unfortunately the way we're living. It's almost like cowardice is the defining feature of our leadership, which obviously is a contradiction in terms. Therefore, we need to kind of maybe put more pressure on people to be a little bit more liberal or libertarian or wherever the phrase might be, and actually, stand up for ordinary people's lives. Because actually, as you know, you've said many, many times on your program that the devastating consequences of COVID are not those deaths which are declining day by day, or at least not rising in the way that they were, but those devastated lives that we probably will never have history told about. Those people who are living alone, who are suffering terribly, and that is where we have to cast our eye now.
There's a lot of catastrophizing. Some of it feels apt, a lot of it doesn't. You listen to those tweets I was reading out there, and actually they weren't wholly representative. And I say that because I did play 3 of them at the end, but actually they were absolutely the majority opinion that was expressed, which was actually when we went out into the real world today, maskless or masked, people generally speaking didn't care very much. Now, isn't that reassuring?
Yeah, because people are nice in general. Obviously, there's Twitter, where people in general aren't nice, partly because it's their subjective unconscious splurged out on the page, whereas actually in reality people are completely friendly and lovely people. You tend to find that there's a lot of things which are going on Twitter, which is replaying a lot of the Brexit conversation. I mean, gammon, COVID-idiot. I went out in the garden on Saturday and got a little bit of sunburn, and I was afraid of coming on here because I thought I'd really line.
We've got makeup
for gammon. Nothing can save me. But yeah, no, that idea of suddenly this kind of disparaging comments which are offered to those people who are bucking the system or playing, granny killers and are not really playing the game from the moral majority is really, really disconcerting. And it's a minority, and that's the point we have to remember. It's those are the people who are in some ways pressurising government to back down. They're following it. What we should realise is actually the majority, the sensible, nice, humane, ordinary citizens are the ones that maybe we should be listening to.
Final thought, and we'll go back to where we started, which is people, individuals, operating under the aegis of their own agency, if you like, making a decision today based on what they've read, what they've talked about, what they've seen. And the question some of them will be asking, and it's a question that's been posed by politicians too recently, if not now, then when? If today was not the day to tear, rip off, gently pull off the mask, then when is it?
Well, it's today, isn't it? I mean, the thing is that, apart from the fact that we've always been told that sunlight is the best disinfectant for this virus, this is the hottest day of the year. It's unbearable on the tube. So people are, sweating just to play the game on the London Underground. But yeah, so this is the most ideal time, which is what Boris Johnson was saying it for. Give him some credit, or somebody some credit. That's why they announced this date rather than data. And I think that they should really stick with it. And now going back on it and reintroducing by the back door vaccine passports, undermining young people's ability to go out and have some fun is an absolute retrograde step.
Austin Williams, really appreciate you coming in.
My pleasure.
I'm getting a bit sweaty. Thanks a lot.